Hey everyone, welcome back to Teens for Business podcast. I'm your host, Ivan,
I'm Jack.
I'm Jackie.
I'm Kyron.
and today we will be going over everything of the Paris Olympics happening this summer. And so, a brief introduction to the Paris Olympics and on the financial side. So, the organizing committee has a total budget of over 4 billion euros, and basically they have a lot of things planned and a lot of money to spend. And the event is powered by 100% private funding and showcasing definitely a very innovative approach to hosting such a large event. And of that funding, the International Olympic Committee contributed over 1 billion euros, 750 million euros came from TV rights, and 470 million euros come from top partnerships. So yeah, basically they have a lot of money and they're going to spend it a lot on the Paris Olympics, especially with cleaning up the Seine River, and a lot of stuff. And the Paris Olympics in general is going to be a very historical event with many different sports. Like I think volleyball, beach volleyball is happening in front of the Eiffel Tower. Archery is happening in front of I forgot what the name was, but the tomb where Napoleon is. So like very historical events and definitely a lot of money being spent into this event. So just kind of a general question. So which Olympic event are you guys most looking forward to and why?
So me personally, I used to swim, but like honestly, I'm not like a swimmer anymore. But I think that swimming is such a big like Olympics thing. Like when I think Olympics, I think like Michael Phelps. I think like all like the swimmers. And like I think that's just because like it's one of the most famous events. And like a lot of the famous athletes we know, like we associate that. So I'm definitely really excited for swimming. Even though like I'm not like a big swim person. And then I'm also really, really excited for cycling, which I know is like a little bit more of like a, I don't know, like less popular sport, but I'm really excited for that. And I think also there's gymnastics, which I think is always like so fun, especially like women's gymnastics. So just like seeing who comes out, and how like all of the gymnasts are gonna do.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to new volleyball and beach volleyball events, and especially with the Eiffel Tower as like I guess like a little bit of backdrop, and it's like being hosted like very close to there. It'll be very interesting to see how like you can combine the Olympics with like pretty like with the nice Paris like architecture, the Parisian culture, and just everything like that Paris is known about. Also, just like Jackie, I've always enjoyed watching the swimming events, not only when I was young, not only just because when I was young, also did swimming, but also like we look up to a lot of those swimming inspirations like Michael Phelps, Katie Ledecky, and Caleb Dressel are some of the big names that I know. And also, I think Kyvan can probably will touch more about this, but this year's U.S. men's basketball team is fielding a very, very strong team. Some people have described this as an NBA dream team from the United States, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how well that team will do in the Olympics.
Yeah, I agree. Just adding off of Jack's last point, US basketball, I think they got all the big names for 2024 as kind of like a last kind of run for the US Olympics because it's going to be the last Olympics for a lot of the older players like Steph and LeBron. I guess other than that, I think track and field is always a big Olympics event, like the 100-meter or other track and field events. So super excited for that as well.
Yeah, definitely. For me personally, a lot of similar things like track and field. Like we have the USA definitely has a lot of great prospects in that, and also swimming. It's always great with Michael Phelps. But yeah, I'm also looking forward to surfing, which is a new event, and it's not even happening in Paris. So that'll be very interesting. So we talked about a lot of things where Paris Olympics is kind of peculiar. So uh, kind of going over, not touching over the financial part yet. So, how do you think the Paris Olympics are different from previous Olympics, such as the ones like even the Winter Olympics, and such as like Rio in 2016 or even London? So, how do you think Paris Olympic is kind of changing this Olympic field genre kind of thing?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot. And I think like with each Olympics game, like every year there's kind of a lot of like every country's like take on it, if that makes sense. Like they always like try to do something that's like innovative, they always try to do something that's creative, and that it stands out from the past 4 years. And so I think one thing about Paris is that they wanted to hold the first carbon neutral games. And like right now, like the planet and having like climate change is like a really, really big issue for a lot of people. And so I think it's actually a really cool initiative that they have going on, because the Olympics, like it's not just like a bunch of athletes going together to compete, like to see who's the best at it. Like it's so much more than just like the athletic part of it. So like it's like the whole like hosting of the games and like the events and like having people come in. So I think it's actually like a really, really cool initiative to see all like the arenas and see like all like the places where they compete being built with that carbon-free environment.
Yeah, I definitely agree that this Olympics is adjusting to a more environmentally friendly Olympics. I feel like especially this Olympics will be a little bit, it'll serve as a little bit of a rebound from the last Tokyo Olympics, as tourism was not really that high in that Olympics because obviously COVID was still a thing. And hopefully we will see that this Paris Olympics will have a lot of hype, which I think it certainly does, considering all the plans that the Paris teams seems to do with the Olympics by putting certain events next to famous places like the Eiffel Tower and other like very Parisian other various like places where like the first thing you come to mind when you think those places, oh, you think Paris, oh, you think France. So those like I guess a bit more incorporation of the Parisian and French culture into these the hosting sites and just where the games are being played is definitely something new that is coming into these Olympics.
Yeah, I think especially with these events being held at different like iconic sites within France and Paris, and then also with these different I guess more niche events, kind of things like skateboarding. I know skateboarding was part of 2020 as well, but these just continuing to introduce these new events and even putting them in like urban areas. So it's more kind of centralized within the or connected within the Paris kind of city and environment. And that's I guess that's something that the previous Olympics kind of haven't been able to do yet.
Yeah, definitely. Just a ton. There's going to be like the general trend is they're going to add more and more sports to the Olympics, and Paris Olympics is one of the first Olympics to continuously add these new sports and to kind of like test the waters a little bit. But I feel like the Paris Olympics has gone for the historical route. I feel like the good comparison is probably like Rio de Janeiro in 2016, where I think they kind of went like the techie route. Like oh, it's like a lot of new things going on, but Paris, I feel like they're going back to their historical roots, like playing at Versailles. Like a lot of these very famous places, historical places built in 18th century, 19th century kind of thing. So yeah, definitely it's very interesting touching back on history, but also kind of advancing these carbon neutral, like very innovative fields. So when we talk about Olympics, it's kind of well known that Olympics brings in a ton of tourists and there's a lot of economic benefits. But there are a lot of other events such as the World Cup, which bring in arguably even more money and more tourists. Like when you watch the Olympics, you're not really watching soccer, right? If you want to watch soccer or football, you watch the World Cup. So, if you were a president, prime minister, or leader of a country, why would you want to host the Olympics where you have to spend a lot of money building infrastructure over other popular events such as the World Cup?
Yeah, that's a great hypothetical question. So first of all, for some context, obviously Olympics in Paris, as we've been saying, and then the Euro Cup is happening also in Europe, obviously. But it's gonna be in Germany, I think it is. Yeah, there we go. It's in Germany. And like obviously, as Ivan said, a lot of people are watching it, but at the same time, like it's very focused on soccer. And because it's happening in Germany, like there's like different events. Like they're not really competitors for like their guests. Like it's like a lot of people aren't thinking like, oh, okay, if I like I'm either gonna go to the Olympics or I'm gonna go to the Euro Cup. Like it doesn't really work like that. Like there's a lot of like gigantic soccer fans who are going to like the soccer championships and they're just yeah, they might watch the Olympics for fun casually on TV, but they're not like crazy fans. Like they're not really getting anyone's jerseys, they're not really getting anyone's merch, things like that. So first of all, the customers, like the target audience base in terms of like who actually goes there isn't like that big. Like it's not like competition in that sense, but it's more about like hosting the Olympics brings in a lot of revenue. So for example, like like Paris, like 10 years ago, like it's not just like built to have Olympics. Like you have to build your stadiums, you have to have like your Olympic pools like set up, you have to like make sure everything is done, like the whole like Olympic village basically. And so like in building that, that creates a lot of like GDP and a lot of economic movement. So even though there's other concurrent events happening, like athletic, maybe like the same similar viewer base, it's still bringing in a lot more economic revenue.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I kind of also want to address this through maybe a different perspective, maybe on the perspective of more like diversity of like and equality, like of like and that a lot of different nations around the world have like a lot of representation. So obviously, over the past few years, diversity and DI have become increasingly important, not just in sports, but just in a lot of other fields, like in business and tech even. There has been a lot of DEI and diversity initiatives. And and just like in Jackie's example, we're just going to use soccer here. There are obviously a lot of countries that are very strong in soccer, but there are also a lot of countries that don't have like the same amount of like I guess like star players that really light up the stage. And we've seen a lot of star players in Europe lighting the stage now in the Euro tournament in Germany, but also like some of these other events like swimming and like track and field, we can see other like I guess more underrepresented nations um have their star in the spotlight, and that definitely contributes to like more like I guess like I guess like more diplomatic relations in terms of some of the countries that some of these big athletes represent, because it could bring in a lot of like popularity towards like some of the more popular and under athletes that come from some of the more underrepresented countries. And just also the support of Paris to bring in these underrepresented athletes also may also may also help bring like a lot of people can also see Paris as like a more like accepting city for a lot of for people that are looking for I guess like for a better life in sometimes bad situations and in like under disadvantaged situations. And there's a lot of initiatives in Paris that are thinking about turning a lot of the Olympic stuff into like further like development and infrastructure for the and business opportunities, especially for these disadvantaged backgrounds in Paris. So I think the so a lot of these like DEI practices are really evident here in the Olympics, and that's definitely a very big benefit. And it will definitely change the socio-economic landscape of Paris and France.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I guess and since hosting the Olympics is a long-term investment, especially with how much you have to like prepare for it by whatever large scale changes you have to make with the infrastructure, preparing all the buildings and all the venues, and being sure that you have enough people running the event, which is going to create jobs. So this entire situation is just a bit basically you're putting a lot of money into it right now, but this is a long-term investment for the social. There's going to be a lot of social economic growth that's gonna be happening that you're betting on for the next couple of years by putting money into something like the Olympics. And I feel like compared to other events, I think the Olympics is still bigger. Like no matter what you try to compare it to, something like the Olympics happening every 4 years, it's still gonna be bigger than something like the World Cup or something like that, because just because of the diversity that it brings with whatever sport or anything that it has to offer, because the World Cup is one sport. So I just think that overall the amount of viewers and the amount of people that are going to attend is basically I think cities and whoever's managing these cities have to view the Olympics as a very great long-term investment.
Yeah, there are definitely some very good points here, but I also wanted to touch onto uh, something similar that happened recently, which is the Tour de France. And because of the Paris Olympics and like the time period between these two events, that they have decided to end the Tour de France in Nice instead of Paris, and that has basically never happened before. So if you were, like if you were the French government or a person in charge of these events, would you have agreed to such a change, and why?
Um, I think so. I think I would do what they did. I actually agree with their change. I know it's like a very big step away from precedence, and like the other competition's also like a very big thing. Like I think when I think like big competitions, I always like that's one of the things I think like Tour de France. But like at the same time, if you think like economically, and like I understand like not everything is like an economics thing. Like not everything is going to be about business. Sometimes it's about culture, it's about tradition, etc. But I think because hosting the Olympics, in my opinion, for a country is almost like an honor. Like there's so many countries that are competing to host it. And so I think like the Olympics should be like the higher priority, if that makes sense, of the two. And even though like the Tour de France is such a big event, it's not on the same level as the Olympics, if that makes sense. And I think while I wouldn't have necessarily enjoyed making the change because it again like strays against like something that is very popular in its own right, I think I still would have made the same decision they did just because I don't want something interfering with another event because that would just like that's like a lose-lose situation for both competitions. And also like it's still in France. Like yes, it doesn't end in Paris anymore, but it's not like they're gonna end it in Germany. Like it's still in France. And so like economically for France, it's still, I think, worth it.
Yeah, I also agree with this change a little bit from a different perspective that Jackie provided. I mean, first of all, the Tour de France and the Olympics are obviously two very big events that Paris needs to host, and since we've seen how big these events are, like I'm not entirely sure if as one city, Paris alone, despite how we all know how big Paris is, I don't know if Paris can sustain itself economically in the long run after hosting both events. And we know obviously in the Olympics, like I've actually in this point disagree with Jackie here because actually a lot of cities have backed out of hosting the Olympics because of the costs that are associated with it. In fact, in the 2024 and 2028 Olympics, there were only two cities that were competing for spots. And even like before, there were a lot of cities that like had a bid in towards like doing the Olympics. They ultimately pulled out. So these cities are obviously Paris and Los Angeles was assigned to the 2028 Olympics. So based off of that, we can obviously see like from previous Olympics, like especially in the Paris and Rio, where financial stability, especially in the long term, became a problem. And we can see that I think Paris like knows that hosting the Olympics is a giant responsibility and is also a really big honor. So and they obviously recognize that it wouldn't be financially feasible to keep both events I think occurring around the same time in the same city. And also, since we know that Paris is going to grow, we also need to see like the rest of the country grow as well. And we know that Paris will obviously like I guess like spearhead a lot of that, but we need like also like more development in another like big potentially popular city. So ending the Tour de France in Nice is definitely a decision that I agree with, and I think that the city of Nice can also benefit from this in the long term too.
I agree. I think that just overall, trying to balance something like this, you kind of have to give priority to the bigger event, which is still the Olympics, I think. And I think that just like Jackie also mentioned, just because you're not ending the Tour de France um in Paris, that doesn't mean doesn't take away from what it's trying to do for the economy or for France in general. So I think that overall, if you want to try to balance these two super large events, you can still do that without trying to cramp everything into one city, like the city of Paris in this case.
Yeah, I actually, agree, but somewhat differently because Tour de France is a very big revenue generator for a lot of the smaller cities around France, rather than Nice, Lyon, Paris, which are like the biggest big three in France. So, changing the Tour de France up actually, I think benefits France in general because they're going through different cities now because Paris obviously is a no-go. So they're changing it up a little bit so it generates revenue in other parts of France, which typically would not be having going through these getting these tourism revenues. So actually be beneficial for the country overall. But the downside is you don't get that very historical, cultural, scenic Champs-Élysées ending to a Tour de France anymore. Obviously, it'll be different. It'll be a different city, but I feel like it's revenue wise and economic wise, it's definitely a good change. But going back to Paris, so Paris is one of the most visited cities in the world. In fact, within the top five, in 2023. So Paris has a lot of tourists already. So what does Paris stand to gain from the Olympics?
That's a good question. So I think with one of the things about Paris hosting the Olympics is that it brings, I think, brand recognition. And it's not about like, oh, like new people are gonna learn about Paris. No, like people already know about Paris. I don't think it's that. I think it's more of about like getting people in and about having the like honor of hosting the Olympics because like when you're hosting the Olympics, like I mentioned before, like you're not just like inviting random people over and to compete in athletics. Like it's so much more than like the athletic competition in itself. It's also about like building everything and making sure like all of your deals. So I know that Paris, like specifically, they had something that was about like the trade unions and like employers. And so like they try to make it more like fair and like socioeconomically responsible for the people who are like helping make this event possible. And so I think that's actually something really innovative that they've done because past Olympics haven't done that. And then going back to my point about brand recognition, like if we think about Rio, for example, in Brazil, was that 2016? It was like one of the previous Olympics. And so like a lot of people like that's like kind of like Brazil became, I don't want to say more famous, but like that place became a bigger like people learn about it more. And like obviously Brazil is famous. Like no one's like, oh my gosh, I just learned about Brazil. No, like people already knew about it. But I think what it really did for them was show off like what they can do. And it opens up a lot of opportunities in the future. So it's not just like a random tourist spot for people, but rather it's a space where people can have their athletic competitions and have like people actually have like that work and opportunity to like make society like and be part of that.
Yeah, I definitely agree, except I feel like in the case of Rio, I don't think it was done very effectively. Not to the like the full extent effectively because I know that in Rio like we've seen pictures of like I guess like the aquatic complex like after the Olympics, like I guess like 4 years after the Olympics. It looks run down. And I feel like some of the other athletic spaces that were used for the Olympics, just built for the Olympics in Rio, they weren't well maintained, and now like I guess like so many years, 8 years into the future, like we see that some of these like other places are also run down and not being used as effectively as it was planned to be used after the Olympics. But Paris, there's already like a lot of big like drawn plans, like for example, like I guess I know we're gonna talk more about like I guess like strategies that Paris are planning to do later to like sustain that long-term economic growth. But for example, like the Olympic Village is gonna be turned into like a residential complex of like around 2,800 apartment units. So those are obviously a lot of obviously they're they're turning these like venue hosting sites into potential like benefits for local infrastructural development and just benefiting the general public in Paris, and that would definitely lead to potentially even like smaller businesses around these hosting venues like benefiting from just like newfound economic opportunity and like potentially like higher reach that they usually couldn't reach before. So those are obviously a lot of small things in Paris that could stand to benefit a lot from these Olympics.
I think the main thing to kind of consider is just making sure the investments you're putting into these buildings and this whatever infrastructure you're adding on is sustainable and you can continue to use it in the future. And it's not just like a one-time thing for the Olympics, because you want to be able to, like, once you're capitalizing off of this Olympic growth, you want to be able to sustain that and make sure you're benefiting whatever local businesses are in the area as well. Whatever, by getting people to kind of shop there in whatever means. So I think it's important for the city to consider how they're basically planning for the Olympics and making sure what they're doing is going to be lasting them down the line and not just for 2024.
Well, I kind of have a hot take, which is Paris doesn't have anything to gain. Um, that's I recently been to Paris and I've seen a lot of stuff, and reading the news, there's a lot of political turmoil regarding the Olympics. And my opinion is that Paris doesn't have anything to gain from the Olympics, and in fact is losing already. Like economically, they are doing fine without the Olympics. Historically, they are doing fine without the Olympics. Like they will generate enough tourism revenue even without the Olympics. And with the Olympics, there'll obviously be a surge of tourism, but roads are being blocked off. They claim to be cleaning the Seine River, and there's just a lot of things like the government people are not happy with how the way government's handling, because there's road closures. You know, people going to work have to go an alternative route that may cost them valuable hours of their life. Like it's actually negatively impacting the people who live in Paris and the Paris economy overall, because they're building, obviously it'll be boosted by building these stuff. But what about afterwards? What do you do about the archery stadium in front of Napoleon's tomb after it's done, right? You got to tear it down. What do you do with the beach volleyball stadium in front of the Eiffel Tower? You tear it down. Like there's going to be a lot of money spent into the Olympics, and with the spirit of France, people don't really like that. They like free like their Parisians are very protest loving, and they don't really like having their money being spent on these things that only cause them trouble. And you're seen in the French politics that definitely nothing is to be gained from hosting Olympics. And I actually think that the Olympics will be changing very soon, because there's not a lot, like Jack said, there's not a lot of cities with the economic capacity to host the Olympics, right? And actually, like hosting the World Cup seems to be a better economic um uh alternative, because I think the US will be hosting the World Cup soon also, and you're spreading it across, they're using football stadiums as world soccer stadiums now. And then there's a lot of like cross using, so they're not building a lot of new facilities as opposed to hosting Olympics where you have to build a lot of new stuff. As opposed to something like the World Cup, you can just utilize big stadiums that already exist in your country. So that is kind of my hot take. But we've talked a lot about, the capacity of various countries and cities to host the Olympics, and that we have seen a lot of examples on the negative economics impact of hosting Olympics, such as in Rio. So we've touched upon it, obviously. So what do you guys think some strategies that Paris can implement to convert these temporary economic boosts to something more long term and avoid what happened by previous host countries and host cities?
Yeah, I actually think you bring up an interesting point about like how Paris doesn't have much to gain. I think it's like a little bit different, like difficult to frame this in the correct way I want to, but I think there's also like the sense of politics, which I think is very interesting that you bring up. And like I'm not an expert on like Parisian politics or like French politics as a whole, but I think it's pretty well known that like France has like they've had like some political issues recently, like even outside of the Olympics, like even before that, or before like that really started becoming a thing, like they have been experiencing some political turmoil. And I actually think, like, for example, like it wasn't in 2023 that they decided to like, they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna do the Olympics next year. Like it's a long process. Like for example, we already know that LA is doing the 2028 Olympics. And like 4 years isn't that much, but I think in that time that they like chose to do it and like they had their bid in, etc. I think it was a political move on the part. Like when they're like as leaders of a country, like they're not just randomly going to be like, oh yeah, let's host it for fun. Like I think for a country to like do that, there has to be like a political and like economic gain. And so one of the things I think is most interesting about how the Parisian Olympics are set up is their efforts about sustainability. And so like and some like obviously some companies and like some countries they have like this whole like greenwashing thing, which I know has been very controversial. But um with the like what they're trying to do in Paris, like for example, they're having a lot more public transportation open. And of course, like then yes, I've made the point about like that hurting like private transportation, like people getting to work in the meantime. But at the same time, like if they're like there's also the other side of like, okay, like this might hurt for a while, but then they're also adding in, I think it was like 3,000 new bikes or some like transportation thing. And they're also like adding in a lot more like I guess like parts of the economy that like, comes down from the Olympics that they can reuse after the events have been hosted. So yes, I think that there definitely are cons to hosting it, but that comes with hosting any kind of big event like this. And so I think at the end of the day, like I think it's just like really hard to predict politically what happens and why there's like experts and like it's difficult to become a politician and like strategist in this area. But as a whole, I still would take I still like as a leader, like if I were to be a leader, I still think it's a good thing to take on. And all of their sustainability strategies that like that should resonate with a lot of Parisians, especially with like the public transportation and aspect of making them see, hey, like this isn't just like using your money to fund athletes and make our city more famous. It's like actually helping citizens as well. Or at least that's how like they can frame it.
Yeah, definitely agree with a lot of the points that Jackie has made, and I think I've already touched on some of the, I guess, like some of the benefits that are being planned to transform some of the sporting events, I mean sporting venues into like potentially like long-term like things that could provide economic benefit. Like for example, I've already mentioned the housing complex thing with Olympic Village, and there's also like new schools that are around the Saint Denis. I don't know how to pronounce that in French, so I could probably teach me someday. But anyway, that's obviously gonna increase the human capital of a lot of the people in the area, and a lot of these different changes. Like also, I forgot to mention the aquatic center is set to become a general sporting complex, and and there's obviously a lot of things that I haven't mentioned yet. And I think in total these changes are projected to bring around like 150,000 jobs and reduce unemployment rates, provide career development opportunities, and these are especially for people in disadvantaged backgrounds. This is a lot of like stuff that I've sort of touched on already, and I know Paris has already drawn out like extensive plans on how they are planning to do that. I think some I actually never I knew there was political turmoil in France as of like right now, but I didn't really see how it had an effect on the Olympics until like just then when Ivan and made that a little bit of like an argument hot take that Paris doesn't tend to gain much. I still think that I'm not at this point, I'm not sure because of I don't follow the political turmoil in Paris. I just know that it is happening, and I don't know like what side is happening. But I definitely think that I definitely agree with the point that hosting the Olympics was I guess like was a decision driven somewhat by politics, and so now the regime is kind of changing a little bit. We don't know what direction it's going to go in, so that is definitely a new factor to consider in terms of how to map out the post Olympics, I guess, like benefits. And also just one thing to point out this is a little bit of a tangent, but at the 2022 World Cup, there was a stadium in Qatar that was made out of containers. And I feel like some of those like developments where you can reuse like certain elements from different sporting events, from different venues, they could be reused as other parts of another sporting event. Because I know that I think those same containers that were part of that stadium in Qatar are being shipped to South America for the 2030 World Cup. And I I think that's the projected site because that's when the World Cup will celebrate their 100th anniversary in Uruguay, which was the first hosting site of the World Cup. So I think um I think definitely we can start seeing a bit an increased like trend of using like reusable stands or reusable like containers or re a lot of different reusable things that could um helps not only save money but also be environmentally friendly as a part of the, I guess, like the environmental initiative that's also associated with hosting the Olympics.
Yeah, I just think that like we said, these countries hosting the Olympics, they're not just like getting ready like the year before. They've had this in the books, planning it for I want to say many years, but it's at least like 4 to 5 years. It's at least before the previous Olympics. You already know which country is hosting the next Olympics, and they're going to need to plan everything in terms of not just these buildings where to host events, but trying to make sure you have the financial capability to be able to not just survive, but like thrive off of an event like the Olympics. So I think with other countries in the past having, I guess, suffered economically, I think Paris needs to consider like which ways they can go in terms of their financial planning, what partnerships they want to focus on, and I guess maintaining a good system of costs and balances just to make sure they're not spending too much in places that they can limit their spending, and then also just making sure that what they're doing in the Olympics and they're encouraging spending, they're encouraging people to kind of get out there and just bring lots of tourism and lots of capital to the area and kind of leverage the global visibility and turn that into long-term growth, because it is going to be hard for a country as big as France to kind of, I guess, grow even further. So they need to kind of have everything planned out pretty well.
Yeah, look, listening to everyone's points, I still believe Paris doesn't have anything to gain. But I feel like it's due to a lot of certain reasons, such as like as I said before, Paris is a massive city, so they already have a very good public transport system. Um, very good in quotation marks. It's decent. And there's not a lot to improve upon in such a short period of time, as in like 4 or 5 years. But as if we move to different cities such as Los Angeles, where they have a notoriously poor public transportation, maybe they can use the Olympics as some sort of a way to improve upon the public transportation. Let's say, like before, like obviously you can't just build a new subway line. Like people are gonna get pissed at you for closing down a road for years, right? But you can say, oh, it's for the Olympics. Then people are more willing to understand. Like it's for the Olympics. There's going to be more jobs created in the long term, and I understand you can close off this road because you're helping the Olympics, right? So they can kind of use the Olympics as some sort of reason to improve upon the existing public transportation system, but I just really don't think it applies to Paris. And due to the demographics of Paris and France in general, like they said they'll clean up the Seine River, which is something, the Seine River is notoriously dirty. But people are saying like, oh, let's all poop into the river the day Macron is gonna swim in it to prove it's clean, so it's all poop in it because we don't agree. Like we don't want our money to be used like this, right? So it's just I think the demographic and the makeup of Paris that makes this a very peculiar case. But you know, for a lot of other cities, such as LA in particular, there's a lot of places to be grown and improved upon by using the Olympics as some sort of a reason. But anyways, that is all of our episode on the Paris Olympics, and hope you guys will come back in our next episode.